everyone, I'm Kendria. I need you to go like, follow, and subscribe Soul Productions.
What's up, everyone? And this is Next Level Thinking.
What's up, everyone? It's another episode of Next Level Thinking. As we all know, it's your host, Chris Holmes, and we always aim to help you take it to the next level. Today, I have a special guest with me by the name of
Mike Szczesniak.
Awesome. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself so they can know why you're on the show.
What's going on, Chris? I appreciate you for having me, man. And I love the next level piece. It's a huge part of my mission and really all of life. So I guess the Spark Notes, I run a high performance coaching consulting company where I help small business owners and sales pros essentially get hyper focused on what activities and what action items are driving the needle, right? And start to do more of it so they could scale faster, make more money, and have a bigger impact in a shorter window of time without the anxiety, the stress, the overwhelm, all the things that we think come along with it. Yeah, man. And I mean, a lot of my journey is I spent 5 or 6 years in corporate America as an engineer. That's how I funded everything. My business started as a side hustle, so I've been there, you know, and had my journey with anxiety and panic attacks, and that really opened up the world here. And those are really weird things to gloss over, but whatever you think is valuable for your audience, I'm all in, man. It's been a really interesting 8 or 9 years of this past of this journey, and whatever we can shed some light on and add some value for your peeps, I'm all in. As you could hear, the dogs, we're all sheltered in place here in New York, so I'll try and mute whenever I can to make sure that we get those out as well.
Gotcha. No problem at all. But awesome. So let's go into like the origin story of everything. So I know we get like a little preview of everything you said earlier. But like, how did this all start? Like, tell us more about you so that we can understand you as a person. Then we go into all the dimes and much more of the businesses and services. So like, who are you? And then we'll build up from there.
I love it, dude. I love it. So my whole life revolved around where I could play soccer in college, literally all of it. And I very much grew up in a family that was like, cool, amazing. You should definitely play in college, but you're not going to go D1 for the sake of going D1 and getting a subpar education. Like, you're going to use it as a tool to get a better academic education, and which was totally cool with me. And, you know, early on, all I wanted to do was make a lot of money, retire young, and open a pit bull rescue foundation. Like, that was my dream. And I remember having a conversation with my guidance counselor, and basically the way that the college showcases and like the recruiting for soccer worked, I had my travel team that I played on. We would go to these college showcases, and there would be a list of the coaches that would be there, right? So I would print it out. I would set an appointment with my guidance counselor, bring it to him, and be like, hey, like, which school should I reach out to? And then I would go home. My dad would help me craft an email, and I would email every single coach that I was interested in their school and saying, hey, I'm on XYZ team. It would be an honor if you would come watch me play. And in one of those conversations we had, you know, my guidance counselor was like, man, you're good at math and sciences. You should look at engineering. I'm like, cool. Do they make a lot of money? Because again, make a lot of money, retire young, pit bull rescue foundation.
The American dream,
kind of the dream for me, you know. And he's like, yep. I'm like, cool, sign me up. Got recruited by an engineering school. And 4 years later, I had a degree in computer science and or computer engineering, excuse me. And I went down to Wall Street, you know, and started the whole corporate climb. And
I know that was a huge transition, switching from there.
Yeah, man. It was, I took the first job that I was offered in New York City, right? I grew up in where I currently live in Westchester County, which is about an hour north of Manhattan. And the dream was, you know, I want to go work in the city, right? And eventually move into the city. So I needed to find something that was in Manhattan that I could take that leap and do the commute for a little bit, save up a bit of money, and then you know, hopefully find a place and move in.
I want to dive a little bit about in there what you just said. Like, so of course, you know, you see so many storylines going to New York, you know, with big opportunities and much more. But I want you to go a little bit deeper about the challenges of moving there, because there's huge opportunities, but I also heard about a huge amount of obstacles. So I want you to go a little bit more in on that.
Well, yeah, rent's pretty damn high in New York City. And honestly, like that was, to be fully transparent, that was my version of like golden handcuffs, I guess. Like, it's not like I had a golden parachute where like the corporate stuff, like the executives, but I was making a lot of money, man. Like I went into engineering because outside of a commission sales role or owning your own business, it was the closest I could find to like what I would call FU money. I had all the accolades that I wanted at a young age, like the senior title, the 6-figure salary, the luxury apartment by like 25. And behind closed doors, it was not that beautiful. It was, I alluded to it before, anxiety, panic, all of these things that I was kind of working through. But there was a lot of struggle with that because like, man, the beginning of my first job was unpaid. And so I would commute 2.5 hours each way. It sounds like those old stories that our parents used to say, right? Like I used to walk uphill both ways. It's like, I don't think that works like that, but it was 2.5 hours between, cause I didn't have the parking pass for my train station. So I had to convince my dad wasn't tough to convince. His office was close to the train. So I'd be like, hey dad,
how much that cost?
yeah. And dude, thankfully my parents helped me pay for the train ticket, cause it was a couple $100 a month. Right. The parking pass would have been another $90 a month, I think, but I had to get on a wait list for that. So I didn't have it. I would get dropped off by my dad. And then between like the waiting for the trains to get all the way down to Wall Street and like the walking, it took me about 2.5 hours each way. And then I would work retail Saturday and Sunday to, have some money, like have some sort of a life. Right. Like, and it sucked. It was unpaid training for what was supposed to be 16 weeks. It ended up being about 6 months. And Hurricane Sandy allowed me to walk away from that contract on my own accord and find a job that was going to pay me what I was worth, which I found, and they ended up paying me about double what I would have gotten in the previous contract.
So I got to dive in before you continue. Even though you mentioned, of course, going through adversity in the training and being a lot longer than you expected, what was some of the things you did learn from that experience that did transition to your next, opportunity? Because I believe like everything that happens in your life, even if you don't like it, helps build you to the person you should be.
Dude, I love that question because the biggest thing for me was I started to read, right? And the main reason for that was like, I was looking at it, I was kind of losing my mind a bit because like it was getting prolonged, right? The contract was getting prolonged. I'm like, I'm supposed to be making money right now and I'm not. And I had this 2.5 hour, like 5 hours a day commuting, 5 hours a day for unpaid training. I was losing it, bro. And I literally, what went through my mind is I have to figure out how to leverage this time so that it's not a complete waste. Because if I'm just losing 5 hours of my day, I'm going to go insane. Like something bad's going to happen. Like I'm going to hurt somebody. It's going to be bad. You know what I mean? And so I started to read. I'm like, okay, well, and at that time it was just industry specific. It was like, let me study for some of the certification tests, right, that the company will pay for me, so it's not out of pocket. Let me study here so I can continue to hone my craft and kind of grow. And then eventually it transitioned into more generic personal development, right? Like I remember I was on the train with some people I went to high school with, and I was reading, the book's actually right in front of me. It's called Why We Want You to Be Rich. It's a book that Donald Trump and now President Trump and Robert Kiyosaki wrote together. And they used to make fun of it because they would like be joking around on the train in the morning at 7 a.m. And they're like, Mike's over here trying to learn how to get rich. Man, I'm still learning. But that's what it started, right? It started from, I'm going to lose my mind if I'm just giving away 5 hours. Let me figure out how to leverage it. And that started this love, or it kind of restoked the love for learning that I think nowadays you kind of walk away from college or university or whatever, like education that you go through, and it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like I finally don't have to do that anymore. And man, that couldn't be further from the truth. You just don't have to do it within the structure of traditional education anymore. Completely. But if you want to grow into anything, like anything successful, really, and we all define success differently, but the way I view it, man, you can't do that without continuing your education and whatever it is that you're excited about. So that was kind of a big start for me. thank you for that question, because we would have glossed over that. And I think that's a really, really cool takeaway.
Oh, no problem. I want to make sure you get the ultimate amount of value, and then, of course, to the audience as well. So through all that and much more, and you're going into the better position, tell a little bit more details of that.
Yeah. So basically, for context, the first company was like IT consulting paired with like headhunting, right? So they offered free training in exchange for and a 2-year contract, and they quote unquote guaranteed placement in a bigger company, right? So you would get paid way less. They valued their training at $30,000. You would get paid way less than you were worth. In my head, I'm like, cool, we'll split that 30 in half, add 15 to each year. Those are numbers I can somewhat stomach, and it'll be like an investment in my future because I'll get into a big investment bank or whatever. Their clients were big name people. And basically, there were a couple different training tracks that you could take. Mine was software development, which was warrants the highest price point afterwards, right? The other ones were like QA, or I think PMO, like project management. And they were shorter training cycles. So I'm like, okay, by the end of it, they would always try and sell us on opportunities that weren't in software engineering, right? They would try and sell us a QA role and be like, you're going to get to opportunity to write some code. And like, that's just because it's the salespeople wanting to place people. And man, I just remember being so against it. And I saw my friends, they didn't place a single developer in my program, in my class, in the tri-state area, which is all we were bound to agree to. They placed one developer because he was willing to move to Delaware, and very talented guy. And the only other 2 people that got placed in the class were willing to take QA roles. One of them, after he got out of his contract, I ended up bringing him over to, he's still a good friend of mine. I ended up bringing him over to the company I was at. But I guess if we're talking about lessons through the transition, that was one of the first moments that it was really like, I'm going to stand for what I believe in and be like unrealistic about my worth, right? Because I know that I deserve more than the roles that they were trying to sell me. And that's also not in alignment with what I wanted to create, right, for myself and my future. So that kind of allowed me an opportunity to like stand up for myself. And then I found myself a position that was going to pay me almost double. And I found it on my own. And I ended up spending 5 years at that company before I left corporate America for good, and took the business full time. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it was an interesting opportunity. No one really understood it. It's common thread in my life, and people don't understand why I do things, but I just like believe them, and I kind of stick for what I believe, and kind of even when it's not necessarily realistic.
Realistic. I like how you throw that word, but they're definitely going to know about your journey and much more right now. And honestly, if you really think about the history of America, especially the great innovators, they weren't traditional, or as we say, realistic. I can
Yeah,
throw a easy example, because there was a time in history when we just stood on, let's say, a hilltop, and we saw a bird just flying across the skies, and I guarantee you some person was like, one day I'm going to fly like the bird, and that person was probably like, are you crazy? We're supposed to
yeah,
walk, run. There's no way we're going to be up there. And then it's
yeah.
through imagination, innovation, learning from people of the past, and much more that also progresses us to, be even better, and just
Hmm.
advancements into the future. So you also hit on your worth, and I'm glad, which actual help us transition to the next thing is, I'm a strong believer of knowing your worth, because that's how you actually build yourself up and becoming
Yeah.
the person you are supposed to be. So tell the audience a little bit more about what you're doing now, and how you're giving tremendous value to the people in your inner circle and much more. So this is your time to throw your advertisement and much more about what you're doing today in today's world.
I appreciate it, man. I mean, at the end of the day, so I started 3 companies while I was in corporate America. The third of which, first 2 failed miserably because of what I was going on in my life, but they all took amazing lessons. And the third was a coaching and consulting company. I had resisted that industry for about 3 years because I had a very negative stigma around it, just personally. At that time, Instagram was big, but it wasn't as big as it is now. And back then, I saw a bunch of 17-year-old life coaches in with their Instagram bio, and I'm like, man, what experience do you have, right? Like I didn't understand the industry. I thought coaching was like athletics. Like I had to find the answer And I had to have the answer to share with my clients. I didn't realize that sometimes it's about being skilled in a skill set to help navigate breakthrough, right? It's very different things. Consulting is providing a solution. Coaching is helping navigate a breakthrough. Two very, very different places. And that distinction, that negative stigma really kept me from the industry for a long time until I met Brennan Burchard, who's the world's leading high performance coach. He played a big role in my journey. And I wrote my first program on the flight home from that event, which was called Fear Hacking Academy. It's still one of the main offers that we do. And I built it as a side hustle, man, for a year and a half. I mentioned this earlier. I was making really good money in software, rents really damn high in New York City and the surrounding areas. By the time I finally left corporate, I was living in Jersey City. You know, I moved outside of Manhattan to save a little bit of money and funnel it all back into the business. And yeah, I finally got to the point where I could jump and take the leap and really like go all in on me. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is I've surrounded myself with amazing people. I've been able to learn from them, and I've been able to get trained by people like Brendan to help navigate breakthroughs. And I've found systems that have worked to help sales pros close more deals, to help business owners that are still very tightly coupled in the day-to-day operations of a business close more deals so they can make more money. They believe in what they do, and they have a bigger impact that way, right? And that's really what we do. We have a couple different verticals, but that's what we do. I help business owners and sales pros scale faster, and I teach them how to do it in a way that feels good.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to piggyback on what you were talking about earlier, and this is regarding when it came to the mention of fear. And I feel like this is actually applies to everybody. I don't care who you are; it applies to everybody's lifestyle. No
Yeah.
matter who or what position you are, it always comes back. But it's how you, I believe, how you address it instead of always running away and attacking it head on. Because a lot of people allow fear to like paralyze them to the point where they don't take any action at all, and they're always in this kind of mindset, what if I should have, and things like that, instead of just taking action and learning along the way, because you never know, that may have been your breakthrough. So I want you to go even deeper regarding when it came to fear and some of the common I guess you can say things you hear from your customers when it comes to building and scaling their business that still regards to fear.
Yeah, dude, fear is such an interesting thing to me. And when you say it out loud, I love that you acknowledge that, because like when we say fear, everyone listening right now, I want you to audit where your mind goes when we think about it. Like, what are you fearful of, right? And we're going to think of things like loud noises, public speaking, fear of heights, spiders, right? Like all of these things that are debilitating fears, things that paralyze us. I love that terminology because it's something that I use in my messaging as well. Things that paralyze us. But if we look at what we're trying to do in this world, like if you're listening to this podcast, people in your tribe, Chris, like they want more. So I know that they'll resonate with this. That's going to take getting uncomfortable, right?
Agree.
That's what it takes. And if we want to create these amazing things, we're going to have to get uncomfortable. We're going to have to face some of these fears. And I know that people listening to this want something bigger. But at the end of the day, if we look at that bigger reality, what reality we construct for ourselves comes from the actions that we take, right? And the actions that we take are determined by the decisions we make. And if we were to really dive into the decision-making process, it's emotional. Decisions are emotional. They're not logical, right? And when we simplify that even more, it comes to pain versus pleasure. Seeking pleasure versus avoiding pain. Avoiding pain, i.e. fear, is more powerful, right? We have a 2,000-year-old brain. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, cool, well, decisions lead to actions, actions lead to reality. I want a big reality. So it really boils to the decisions. And the most powerful force in that process of making these decisions is fear. But we're only getting paralyzed by it? Come on, man, that sounds like a rigged system to me. So we found a way to hack it. And, you know, at the end of the day, we hear all these cliches of use fear as a compass, which I believe in. There's a great book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. He talks about it as like a resistance, which this resistance is fear, and we need to lean into it. but sometimes leaning into it isn't enough because we're still fearful. This is a very powerful practice, or a very powerful process in our brain, right? Like it wants to keep us safe. That's the number one mission.
Yes.
But these things that we're fearful of are often irrational, and they're holding us back from the greatness that we want to create for our lives. So, dude, it's a little bit of building a mindset around leaning into that fear. And then it's also arming ourselves with a skill set of maybe manufacturing some fear, right? That's stuff that won't hurt us, but drive us to make the right decisions. All these things. It's a fairly robust system. It's tough to go into at a really like quick bite-sized frame, but that's essentially it. We learn how to leverage it because it drives decision-making. And if we could get super clear on what decisions we want to make, we'll be able to figure it out and do more of it by leveraging and hacking that decision-making process.
Awesome. Now, I got to follow up this one with
Let's
another
go.
great question, is taking accountability for your actions and stop blaming others. Because I think this is very huge, where people who want huge success never take accountability for their past actions that actually led them to their decision
Mm-hmm.
and their position where they're at right now. Because if people would just like look at their life from the outside in, they are the reason why they're in this position. Now, you can't control where you started, but you damn sure can control where you're going. And
Yep,
I think I'm a strong
100%.
believer of that. So I want you to go a little bit more in depth when it comes to that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I believe responsibility is one of the most important words in the world, because just like you mentioned, every situation about your reality is because of you. Everything, right? And not in a blaming like your fault type of way, but it's your responsibility. You see what I'm saying? Like there's a distinct difference right there. And I think people often stray towards playing the victim because they're like, man, that's not my fault. It's like, no, we're not saying it is, but it's your responsibility if you say that you want something bigger, right? When we take this responsibility, you get back in the driver's seat. Otherwise, you're sitting in the back, just acting like you're in an Uber and someone else is dictating what's happening in your life.
Taking control of the wheel.
Yep, you got to take control of the wheel. You got to get back in that driver's seat, and responsibility is the way that we do it. There's a great book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and former Navy SEAL. Highly recommend that book. It's a very aggressive mindset, but it basically means like, let's use the example of a company. If you run a Fortune 500 company and someone 3 or 4 levels down from you in the chain of command within this organization mess up, that's your fault, right? Because you put that person who put that person who put that person who eventually hired the person who messed up. It's your fault. And people will be like, no, it's them. It's like, no, but you actually led that chain of action, right? And it's such a powerful mindset. And yeah, feel free to have another follow-up question. I'm kind of ranting about this because I really believe this stuff, and I'm glad you brought it up. But dude, it's really important, and the more that we could take ownership, the more in control we'll be of constructing our reality. Because you're right, you can't like, it's not your fault, or it's not like you're good or bad where you started. It's out of your control. But in today's world, like, it's your responsibility to get where you want to go. And that's not to say some people will have it easier than others, but it's still your responsibility. And when we can adapt that, man, it puts us in an empowered state, changes the game.
Awesome. Always about a game changer and much more. So we're coming closer to the end. I'm gonna hit you with this question and we'll close it up. So explain I'll throw it like this: the power of the mind. I'm a believer that the power of the mind is everything. You control your perspective of the world, your actions, the things you can do, and much more. It all comes down to the mindset. So what is your viewpoint on that?
It's everything. Mindset literally is everything, right? And it's completely malleable. Here's what's important. I keep saying there's a great book. There are a lot of great books out there.
Go
But
ahead
there's
and
a
keep
great
throwing
book
them jewels.
called Mindset. I think it's literally called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. I have to reread it. Actually, this is a good reminder for me. But she talks about growth versus fixed mindset. And you could develop a growth mindset, by the way. Growth mindset being like, oh, what don't I know? Right? Like let's use the airplane example. The Wright brothers, very much a growth mindset, right? There's no reason that they should have been the ones that figured out aviation. Like, it's my favorite entrepreneurial story of all time. If you really dive into it, they're two bike mechanics, and there were literally companies that were backed by massive corporate dollars trying to solve the same problem, and the Will from the Wright brothers figured it out first. Like, come on, man, that's so sick. But that's growth mindset. The fixed mindset would be someone like you kind of painted the picture of, no, you're supposed to walk. Like, no, that's impossible, right? That's fixed. So when you have a fixed mindset, you're literally, by the way, that fixed is imposed by what someone else taught you. You weren't just born with these things, right? So you're just taking someone, it's another example of getting in the back of the Uber, right? Like, I don't want my life to be an Uber. When we could develop that growth mindset, all of a sudden it yields this opportunity to figure out what's next. What skill sets can I develop? Right? We have amazing resources out there to use. YouTube if you want to go the free route. Like, you can find anything, or figure out how to get access to capital and then hire the people who know what you need to know and like get around them. We live in this amazing world where there's so much opportunity, but if we can't develop the mindset to do it, changes the game. Like, it completely halts our growth. And by the way, I'll throw this in too, take it for what it's worth. Your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between true and false. It believes what you tell it most powerfully and most consistently, right? And if you're going to go into the numbers of thoughts, you have on average maybe 60,000 thoughts per day. Depending on the studies you look at, a massive percentage of that, like 85+% of that, are habitual thoughts. Right? So we don't control them. We can control what will become them, but there's like 15 to 11% that we actually control. Figure out what that 11% is getting populated by. Are you watching mainstream media that's just throwing a bunch of numbers on either side? This isn't a political comment. On either side of the aisle, that the numbers are just like ridiculous, that's all fear mongering? Or are we going to sit down and listen to a book and be like, let me figure out in 300 pages or less how the Wright brothers did what they did, or let me figure out how Phil Knight built Nike, right? Or let me read from Gary Vee or Brennan Burchard or any of these people. Man, I love this stuff. I'm an engineer, bro. I'm a data nerd. I love this stuff. I love to geek out about the mind. And there's another great book called What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Dr. Shad Helmstetter that really dives into like the neuroscience aspect of it, because positive thinking used to be a bunch of woo-woo nonsense. It used to be pie in the sky, like, oh, being positive about stuff that doesn't matter. Like, that's not what it is. But now there's science that yields actual numbers as to why it's beneficial for you. So I highly encourage people to look into why all these things matter and how they could start to leverage it for their own growth, because it said this a lot, it will change the game.
And you mentioned a lot of great different books as well. I'm gonna have to make sure I put those links and much more in the description. So a tremendous amount of value. So as we close things up, I want you to leave the audience with a closing statement and where can they find you? So it's on you. Go.
Appreciate it, man. Chris, thanks again for having me. The best place to find me is my podcast. I run a show called the Results Engine Podcast. I've been very, very fortunate to connect with some people that I've been looking up to for many years on the internet. Right? I've been virtual mentors of sorts and interview them, and then also just tactical high performance stuff. So that's the best place. I'm just Mike Szczesniak on all social too. So if anything I said you want to challenge, or you have questions around, you want me to go deeper, like slide in the DMs. Don't worry, you're not immediately going to get thrown into a sales conversation. I know sometimes there's that barrier, right? You're like, I want to ask a question, but I feel like I'm gonna get pitched something. Like, we could have that conversation if everybody wants, but let's get your questions answered, because now more than ever with what's going on in the world, we need to have clarity around everything. So do not hesitate. I answer all my DMs. And yeah, man, I mean, at the end of the day, last remarks, get clear on really clear on what you want. in life and what it will take to get you there. Clarity in the high performance world, we call it the cornerstone habit. When you have clarity, everything rises, but when you don't, everything kind of falls back, right? It's like that cliche, a rising tide lifts all ships. What people don't talk about is when that tide goes out, the ships go with it, right? Clarity is the tide. So the more clarity you can have around what it is that you want, what you're doing right now that will lead to the needle moving, right? What's leading to your results. When you know those things and you can track those numbers, it changes the game. So obviously we have stuff that we could plug in and take those numbers even further. If that's of interest, slide in the DMs. I'm happy to support, but that's all you need right there. Track what you're doing and get super clear on what moves the needle, and you could start to grow those numbers over time.
Awesome. So thank you definitely for taking our time to be on the show. You provided a great, tremendous amount of value, especially with the books. So I'm going to make sure I find like links or where they can find them so they can do the more further research and just empower their mind even much more. So we're going to close this out. It's your host, Chris Holmes, as always. And today I have my special guest by the name of
Mike Szczesniak.
Awesome. As we always say, make sure you take it to the next level and empower that mind, because the mind is everything. So peace and much love.